This is Professor Schmidt. Wanted to talk to you briefly about energy and especially alternative energy. As you know, we are having a great deal of concern in the world about the use of some forms of energy and the risks that they present. We can start with nuclear, which is very controversial since the meltdown at Chernobyl. It's very dangerous. You can't dispose of the leftovers from a nuclear power plant very easily. And then you have oil, coal, and gas, which are the current major ones, geothermal and hydroelectric. And then there are some energies that are being discussed that are perhaps considered alternative energy. Ocean waves and ocean currents are one. Biofuels, all of the different forms of making fuels out of biological material, ethanol and biodiesel, and all kinds of other fuels made that way. Then you have solar, including solar panels and passive solar, and of course wind, which is very important. I wanted to talk for just a couple of minutes to you about wind. I recently received an article by someone writing, I believe it was in the New York Times, about wind turbines. And the article said that in the west of the United States, in California, in the Mojave Desert, they are building wind farms with wind turbines. And they have suddenly discovered a really big problem. And that is that the United States military has found that the wind turbines conflict with and disturb radar and make many radar systems not function properly for some reason. The idea is that if you put large wind farms in various places, you may have some significant problems. For example, there was also some evidence that these turbines were confusing weather radar and making weather radar not be able to discriminate between severe weather and thunderstorms and other forms of weather and simply disturbances that were caused by the operation of these wind turbines. So that's one place that opposition is coming from. Of course, there are other concerns. For example, in Massachusetts, on Cape Cod, on the coastline, people have opposed the construction of offshore wind turbines because they say that they destroy the view, which is very important to people on Cape Cod, the view of the ocean and the view of the horizon and of the sky. They even found that American Indians, Native Americans, objected to the building of these wind turbines because the Native Americans, American Indians, say that the landscape there, the sky, the water, and so on, is sacred, that it has religious and spiritual meaning to them. So there's been a lot of opposition to building a big wind farm in a perfect place that is shallow, where they can put these big towers and where there is sufficient wind to make that work very well. In another state on the west coast, on the east coast, which is Vermont, they also have been very opposed to these turbines, the wind turbines, because it's a tourist state. That's one of their biggest industries, and they feel that wind farms and wind towers will destroy the kind of historic and tourist-oriented atmosphere of the state of Vermont. I saw another article in which in the west somewhere they were going to build a wind farm in a valley where the wind blows through this valley very consistently. People living there said they did not want the noise of the wind turbines and the structures interfering with the beautiful landscape which they love and appreciate, and which they didn't want disturbed. Finally, there are people in the United States who like to watch birds, who they're called birders. And they watch the birds migrating. They go with their binoculars and cameras and take pictures. They write down all the different birds they see and so on. And the birders have been very opposed to wind farms because they say that depending on where they're built, the blades can kill birds as they migrate. And that's even some evidence that even bats, which fly only at night and send out radar, are confused that their radar signal doesn't catch the blades, and that bats are getting killed also because of these wind generators, wind towers. So let me point out to you that this is the United States, and in the United States, the public opinion is very important. And if people are opposed to wind generated power for a variety of reasons that they find unacceptable, they can make a lot of difficulty for companies that are trying to build wind generating facilities. They can file lawsuits which can delay for years and years the construction of these. They can require things like environmental impact statements, which are research that has to be done on the impact of wind generating facilities on various aspects of nature and society. I even saw a short article that there was concern that the big wind towers built offshore in the ocean would make sounds underneath the ocean that would disturb whales and other animals that are very sensitive to noise and that require certain silence in order to communicate and be able to actually navigate and direct themselves. So even though we are very worried about the traditional forms of energy, we know that oil can be dangerous, produces a lot of greenhouse gases, and coal is also a very dirty fuel in many cases. We have not yet found, a perfect solution, because there is also quite a lot of resistance to some of these other forms that I call alternative energy. In the case of biofuels, for example, to make alcohol and use it as a fuel, you have to plant a lot of corn and other products, or if you're making biodiesel, you have to plant soybeans usually to make the diesel oil. And a lot of groups are opposed to planting intensive crops. It is said to be bad for the environment because you're using so much energy to plant the crops. You're using fertilizers and herbicides and pesticides to grow those crops to then make the energy. That there is a lot of concern about that. Solar, in some parts of the United States, they're building huge solar plants where they put mirrors in the desert to catch the sunlight and heat up water until it becomes steam and then drive turbines. And some people are very worried about the environmental effects of these massive arrays of mirrors in many different ways. They do seriously disturb the local ecosystems where they're built. And there's even some concern that these reflecting mirrors may alter climate because they're so huge that they may interfere with the normal formation of clouds and rain and so on. So finding alternatives to the traditional way that we have made fuels for electricity but also for transportation is proving to be a much more complicated thing than we thought. And some people say we should do away with all the regulations and let these companies build so that we can become energy independent and have these alternative fuels. Myself, I believe that we should examine the possible negative effects of all of these because we don't want to add a new problem to the problem of producing energy. So I think caution is a very necessary policy. Thank you.